You think you're applying for a government job. You've filled out forms before, sat through interviews, passed background checks. This feels familiar. But somewhere between the fifth security checkpoint and the room where they ask about your family's political beliefs, you begin to understand. This isn't about whether you're qualified. This is about whether you'd die on command, whether you'd betray anyone, whether the concept of personal loyalty still exists anywhere inside you, or if they've finally found someone hollow enough to fill with their purposes. You're tuned to the Velvet Obscura. Tonight we look into one of the most secretive recruitment processes on Earth, the Federal Security Service of Russia, the FSB, successor to the KGB. The organization that shapes modern Russia from the shadows, that watches its citizens with technology the Stasi could only dream of, that operates with legal immunity and answers only to the president himself. And tonight, we're walking through what it actually takes to join their ranks, or more accurately, why you'd never make it through. If this kind of deep dive into the machinery of modern intelligence helps you drift off, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. It genuinely helps more people find these stories. And I'm always curious where this is finding you tonight. Drop a comment with your location. Now, settle in, maybe wrap yourself in an extra blanket against the winter cold, and let's ease into this journey together. We're exploring why the FSB recruitment process isn't designed to find the best candidates. It's designed to find the most controllable ones. The building doesn't look like much from the outside. Not at first. Somewhere in Moscow, or perhaps in one of 14 regional centers scattered across Russia, you've been directed to report at a specific time. The address came in a brief letter, formal and cold. No details, no explanation, just a date, a time, and coordinates. You might have applied online, filled out the preliminary forms on the FSB Academy website, though most successful candidates never apply at all. According to former KGB officer Mikhail Lyubimov, speaking to the Moscow Times in 2014, the security services don't particularly like people who apply by themselves. He called them initiativniki, those who initiate on their own. The preferred method is active recruitment, where FSB representatives approach promising candidates at elite universities like the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, identify them through careful observation, and begin the slow process of cultivation. But you applied anyway. Perhaps you're young, idealistic, drawn to the idea of serving your country. Perhaps you need the money. FSB salaries are higher than average Russian wages, with access to foreign currency and the possibility of foreign postings. Perhaps you're simply curious, unable to resist the mystique that still clings to Russian intelligence services despite decades of supposed reform. The building's entrance is guarded, not obviously, not with military presence, but you feel watched from the moment you approach. Security cameras track your movements. Your name is checked against a list. You're directed through a metal detector, asked to leave your phone in a locker. The walls are institutional gray, the floors polished to a cold shine. Portraits of leaders past and present watch from walls. Putin, of course, but also Dzerzhinsky, founder of the Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police that would eventually become the KGB. His eyes follow you down the corridor. This is where it begins, not with tests or interviews, but with observation. Every movement you make is being assessed by people you can't see. How you walk, whether you look around nervously or maintain composure, whether you ask questions or follow instructions without comment. The FSB doesn't need to tell you they're watching. You feel it in the weight of the silence, in the way the receptionist's smile never quite reaches her eyes in the camera dome that rotates slowly in the corner of the waiting room. You're handed a clipboard. Forms. Page after page of forms. Your full name, birth date, place of birth, your parents' names, their occupations, their political affiliations, your grandparents, your siblings, every address you've lived at for the past 10 years, every school attended, every employer, every foreign trip, no matter how brief, every romantic relationship that lasted longer than 3 months, every friend you consider close, their names, their occupations, their addresses. The questions seem endless. Have you ever been arrested? Have any family members been arrested? Have you ever attended a political protest? Do you have foreign bank accounts? Do you own property abroad? Do any family members own property abroad? Have you ever communicated with foreign intelligence services? This question sounds absurd until you realize how broadly they might define communicated. A chance conversation with an American tourist, an email exchange with a professor at a Western university, a social media friendship with someone who works in government in a NATO country. Some questions are designed to expose debt, which creates vulnerability. Others probe for foreign connections, which create suspicion. Still others seem designed purely to establish a baseline of your honesty, planting small lies they can catch later, because they will catch them. According to research published by security experts examining FSB methods, the background checks conducted on potential recruits are extraordinarily thorough, often taking 3 months or longer. They will verify every address, contact every employer, interview neighbors and former teachers and childhood friends. They will pull financial records, medical records, educational transcripts. They will examine your social media presence going back years, not just your posts, but your likes, your comments, your patterns of activity. And they're not looking for perfection. They're looking for control points. The FSB, like its predecessor the KGB, operates on a principle of compromat, compromising material. If you have secrets, they need to know them before someone else can use them against you. More importantly, they need to know them so they can use them to ensure your loyalty if needed. You notice something as you fill out the forms. The questions about family keep recurring, approached from different angles. What are your parents' political views? What newspapers do they read? Do they attend religious services? Have they ever criticized the government? The repetition isn't accidental. As detailed in declassified KGB training manuals from 1989, obtained and published by the Daily Beast, Soviet intelligence services developed sophisticated methods for assessing candidates through seemingly redundant questioning. The goal is to catch inconsistencies, but also to measure your comfort level discussing family members, your willingness to potentially inform on them if necessary. Because that's what this is really about. The forms aren't just gathering information. They're establishing your boundaries, testing how much you're willing to give up for this opportunity. Your privacy. Your family's privacy. The line between personal and political life. If you hesitate, if you leave blanks, if you seem uncomfortable, that's noted. Not necessarily disqualifying, but noted. The waiting room fills with other candidates. You're not supposed to talk to them, but you observe them anyway. Young men, mostly, though a few women. All Russian citizens. The FSB generally doesn't recruit foreigners for operational positions, though according to reports from CNN in 2022, they have an extensive network of informants and assets among immigrant communities and diaspora populations. Height requirements favor taller candidates. You need to be at least 175 centimeters, about 5 feet 9 inches, though exceptions exist for candidates with exceptional skills. Most appear to be under 28, the rough age cutoff, though combat veterans sometimes receive waivers. Hours pass. You finish the forms, hand them in. You're told to wait. No explanation of what happens next, no timeline, just wait. This is part of the process too, you'll realize later. Testing patience, testing obedience, seeing who gets frustrated, who demands explanations, who simply accepts the uncertainty. When your name is finally called, you're led down another corridor, deeper into the building. The walls here have no windows. The doors have numbers but no labels. You're placed in a small room with a desk, 2 chairs, and nothing else. No clock, no decorations. Just walls and fluorescent lighting that hums faintly. A woman enters, middle-aged, professional, carrying a folder with your name on it. She introduces herself without rank or title. She sits across from you and opens the folder. Everything you wrote on the forms is there, but also more. Documents you don't recognize, photographs. She begins to ask questions, and within minutes, you realize something unsettling. She already knows the answers. She's not asking to gather information. She's asking to see if you'll lie. You traveled to Finland in 2019. What was the purpose? You explain it was a brief vacation with friends. She nods, makes a note. You stayed 4 days. Where did you stay? You provide the hostel name. And who did you meet with while you were there? You insist you didn't meet with anyone, just toured the city with your friends. She looks at you steadily. Our records show you had dinner with a Finnish national named Mika Virtanen on your 2nd evening. Why didn't you mention this on your application? You don't remember anyone named Mikko. Then you do. A friendly local at the restaurant who chatted with your group briefly, maybe sat at your table for 20 minutes. You explain this. She writes it down. And you didn't think to mention this contact with a foreign national. You apologize, say you didn't realize brief social contact needed to be reported. She doesn't respond, just continues to the next question. This continues for over an hour. Small discrepancies in your timeline. A period of unemployment you explained as travel, but records show as receiving unemployment benefits. A friend you listed as having no criminal record, who was actually fined for a minor offense years ago. Nothing major. Nothing that would disqualify an application for a normal job. But this isn't a normal job. Based on accounts from former FSB officers and investigations by organizations like the Atlantic Council examining Russian security services, these initial interviews serve multiple purposes. They establish the agency's omniscience. They know everything, so don't bother lying. They test your response to pressure and accusation. They identify your weak points, the topics that make you uncomfortable or defensive. And they begin the psychological process of breaking down your sense of having any private life separate from the state. The medical examination comes next, more thorough than anything you've experienced. Blood tests, urine tests, cardiovascular assessment, vision and hearing tests, psychological screening, neurological examination. You're measured and weighed. Scars are documented. Dental health is assessed. The examining physician is impersonal, efficient, asking about prior injuries and illnesses while making notes in your file. According to the official requirements published by FSB-affiliated institutes, candidates must have no serious chronic conditions, no history of mental illness, no substance abuse issues. You must meet stringent physical fitness requirements that will be tested later. But the psychological portion is where things become strange. You're asked to complete a series of written tests. Some are standard personality assessments. Do you prefer working alone or in groups? Do you consider yourself optimistic or pessimistic? How do you handle stress? Others are more unusual. You're presented with ethical scenarios and asked what you would do. A colleague is stealing supplies. A supervisor is having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. You discover classified information is being leaked. Each scenario has no obviously correct answer, only choices that reveal your instincts about loyalty, authority, and moral boundaries. As described in research on intelligence recruitment practices, some questions are designed to identify empathy as a potential weakness. You're shown photographs of people in distress and asked to describe what you see. You're given hypothetical situations involving potential suspects and asked how much force you'd use to extract information. The psychologists aren't looking for sadistic tendencies. Those are disqualifying. They're looking for the ability to compartmentalize, to separate personal feelings from operational necessities. To understand intellectually that you might have to hurt people without dwelling on it emotionally. One section asks about your relationships, not just romantic relationships, but friendships, family bonds, mentors. Who do you trust most? Who would you call in an emergency? Who knows your secrets? The questions map your emotional support network, identifying who you might be vulnerable through, who might be leveraged if necessary. It's framed as standard psychological assessment, but you're beginning to understand its intelligence gathering. Everything is intelligence gathering. Days blur together. You return multiple times, the building becoming familiar but never comfortable. You're interviewed by different people who ask overlapping questions, checking your answers for consistency. Some are friendly, almost conversational. Others are cold and accusatory. According to declassified training materials, this variation is intentional. Different approaches reveal different aspects of personality. Some candidates crack under aggression, but remain composed under friendly questioning. Others do the opposite. The physical testing is brutal, not because the standards are impossibly high, but because they're conducted under observation and deliberately stressful conditions. You're required to complete a 3,000-meter run in under 10 minutes and 30 seconds, not Olympic level, but challenging for most civilians. Pull-ups, push-ups, sit-ups, all while being timed and watched. Hand-to-hand combat drills against trained instructors. Swimming tests if the role might involve maritime operations. You're pushed to exhaustion, then pushed further, because they need to see how you function when you're depleted and hurting. Between exercises, you're asked questions. Simple things at first. Your name, your birth date, your address. Then, more complex. Why do you want to serve? What would you do if ordered to surveil a family member? If you had to choose between following orders and doing what you thought was right, which would you choose? You're exhausted, your muscles trembling, sweat in your eyes, and they're asking questions designed to strip away prepared answers and get at instinct. There's a test you didn't expect. You're placed in a room with another candidate and given a task to complete together. Assembling something, solving a puzzle. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're being observed through one-way glass. Analyzed not for your problem-solving ability, but for how you interact. Do you try to take control? Do you defer to the other person? Do you collaborate genuinely, or just pretend to while pursuing your own approach? Most importantly, do you understand you're being watched, and does that change your behavior? According to research on Soviet and Russian intelligence methodology published by organizations like the Wilson Center, group dynamics testing has been a standard practice since the KGB era. The goal is to identify natural leaders, followers, and manipulators. All three types are useful in different roles, but the agency needs to know which category you fall into. More critically, they need to know if you're conscious enough of being observed to modify your behavior. a crucial skill for field work, but also an indicator that you might be able to deceive your handlers. Weeks pass, maybe months. You're called back intermittently with no pattern you can discern. Sometimes weeks go by without contact, then suddenly 3 appointments in 1 week. You can't tell if this is standard procedure or if something about your application has raised concerns. You're not told anything. No feedback, no indication of whether you're advancing or about to be rejected. The uncertainty is maddening, and you suspect that's intentional too, testing your tolerance for ambiguity and lack of control. Then come the loyalty tests, though you won't recognize them as such until later. A friend you've listed as a reference contacts you, asking strange questions. Did you really apply to the FSB? Don't you think that's risky, given the organization's reputation? What would you do if they asked you to inform on people you know? The questions feel out of character, too pointed. Later, you'll wonder if your friend was approached, asked to probe your commitment. Or if it wasn't your friend at all, but someone impersonating them to see how you'd respond. You receive an email from an address you don't recognize. It claims to be from a Western journalist researching FSB recruitment, asking if you'd be willing to speak confidentially about your experience. The message is carefully worded, appealing to vanity and offering payment. You delete it immediately, but you wonder, was it real? A test? Do they already know you received it? Should you report it? You report it. Better to seem paranoid than disloyal. As detailed in investigations by the investigative outlet Bellingcat examining FSB operational methods, the recruitment process includes deliberate temptation scenarios. Candidates are exposed to opportunities for financial gain, foreign contact, or rule-breaking to see who bites. An FSB recruiter might approach you in civilian clothes, claiming to represent a private security firm offering better money. An attractive stranger might express romantic interest and casually ask about your work. You might find an envelope of money in your car with no explanation. Every scenario is a trap, and your only winning move is to report it immediately to your FSB contacts. The money trap is particularly insidious because many candidates are struggling financially. The application process takes months and often requires reducing working hours to attend appointments. Some candidates are offered small loans or gifts by people who claim to be friendly to security services. According to reports from organizations examining Russian intelligence practices, accepting any money from any source during the recruitment period is grounds for immediate rejection and potential prosecution. Even if the offer seems legitimate, even if you plan to repay it, even if you desperately need it. The FSB needs to know you can't be bought, which paradoxically means proving you can resist being bought even when you're financially vulnerable. You begin to notice you're being followed. Not obviously, not threateningly, but you spot the same car several times over a few days. The same person in different locations. You mention this to no one, unsure if you're paranoid or if it's real. You research counter-surveillance techniques online, then immediately worry that searching for such information might itself be suspicious. Everything feels like a test. As described in the CNN investigation into FSB informant recruitment published in 2022, candidates are often subjected to extended surveillance during the vetting process. This serves multiple purposes. It verifies that your daily life matches what you've reported. It identifies any hidden relationships, substance abuse issues, or foreign contacts. It assesses your situational awareness. Do you notice you're being followed? And it applies psychological pressure, creating the paranoid understanding that you're always being watched, which will be your reality if you're accepted. Months in, you're called to a different building. The interview here is conducted by an older man with the bearing of career military. He doesn't introduce himself. He has a new folder with your name, this one thicker than before. He begins by summarizing your application, your background, your motivations, your performance in testing. It sounds positive. You allow yourself a moment of hope. Then he asks the real questions, questions that make the previous interviews seem gentle. If your mother was suspected of anti-state activity, would you report it? If you were ordered to use physical force during an interrogation, would you refuse? If you discovered your spouse was having an affair with a foreign diplomat, what would you do? If you were offered a position that required you to assume a false identity and cut contact with your family for years, would you accept? The hypotheticals are based on actual events, according to experts on intelligence services. These aren't abstract scenarios. They're situations FSB officers have faced and will face again. Your answers are being evaluated not for what you claim you do, but for how quickly you answer, whether you hesitate, whether you try to find loopholes or ask for clarification versus simply complying with the premise. One question catches you off guard. Your best friend since childhood is involved with a group advocating political reform. Not violent action, just organizing peaceful demonstrations. The FSB asks you to monitor this person and report on their activities. What do? You consider the question carefully. There's no good answer. If you refuse, you've shown divided loyalty. If you agree too quickly, you might seem like an opportunist willing to betray anyone. You try to navigate the middle ground, saying you'd need to understand the specific threat level, the nature of the activities, the legal framework. He watches you with no expression. Writes something down, moves to the next question. Later you'll realize the trap wasn't in the answer, but in the question itself. By asking what you would do, they revealed they might ask this someday. By making you think through betraying a friend, they've planted the idea that such betrayal is a possibility, a job requirement you should be preparing for psychologically. The interview itself was conditioning, normalizing the concept of informing on people you love. According to accounts from defectors and former intelligence officers, this psychological preparation is crucial. As detailed in the investigation by The Guardian. Examining former FSB informants, the successful candidates aren't necessarily those without moral qualms. Those are often psychologically unstable. The successful candidates are those who can compartmentalize, who can understand intellectually that loyalty to the state supersedes personal relationships without becoming emotionally disturbed by this understanding. The end comes quietly. You receive a letter, physical mail, not email. It thanks you for your interest in serving the Federal Security Service. After careful review, it explains, you have been found unsuitable for service at this time. The phrasing is polite but final. No explanation, no details about what disqualified you, no appeal process. You're simply unsuitable. You feel relief and disappointment in equal measure. Relief because the process was grinding you down, because you weren't sure anymore if you wanted this, because somewhere in the months of testing, you'd started to frighten yourself with what you were willing to consider. Disappointment because you'd invested so much time, because there's shame in rejection, even from an organization you'd begun to have doubts about. But there's something else too, a lingering unease. Because they know everything about you now. They have documentation of your family, your finances, your weaknesses, your fears. They've tested your loyalty and found it wanting by some metric they'll never explain. And you understand, with growing certainty, that this knowledge doesn't disappear just because you won't be working for them. Your phone feels less private. Your computer seems to load certain sites more slowly, as if something is monitoring traffic. You notice the same car that followed you weeks ago is back, just for a day, then gone. Or maybe you're paranoid now, damaged by the process, seeing threats that don't exist. But according to investigative reports on FSB practices, rejected candidates often do remain under periodic surveillance, especially if they gained substantial knowledge of internal procedures during the application process. The FSB operates on the principle that information is power, and security is control. You were allowed to see inside the machine, to understand how they evaluate and manipulate and control. That knowledge makes you dangerous, not because you might work against them actively, but because you might share what you learned, might warn others, might demystify the process. So you remain a person of interest, filed away, tracked occasionally, your phones potentially monitored, your foreign contacts noted. And if you ever do anything they don't like, if you join a protest or criticize the government publicly or associate with people they consider threatening, they have a very thick file on you already. They know your pressure points, your family members, your financial vulnerabilities, your secrets and your lies, and your moments of moral flexibility during testing. They know exactly how to approach you again, this time not to recruit, but to coerce. This is the truth they don't tell you when you first apply. The FSB recruitment process isn't really about recruitment at all. It's about control. Those who make it through become controlled assets, trained, monitored, bound by secrecy oaths and compromat, and the knowledge that the organization they serve is also the organization most capable of destroying them if they ever step out of line. Those who don't make it through become controlled risks, filed away, watched periodically, understood well enough to be managed if necessary. According to academic research on Russian security services, published by the Atlantic Council, the FSB inherited from the KGB an organizational culture that views all Soviet citizens, now Russian citizens, as potential assets or potential threats, with very little space between these categories. The recruitment process simply formalizes this relationship, identifying who can be made an asset and who must remain a managed threat. The most successful candidates, according to former officers, aren't those with the best skills, or the highest intelligence, or even the strongest loyalty to Russia. They're those who've already internalized control, who've accepted that they have no private life, who understand that the organization owns them completely and are comfortable with that ownership. Many come from families already in security services, growing up with this understanding as normal. Others are identified young, sometimes as teenagers, and cultivated over years until the idea of resisting FSB control simply doesn't occur to them anymore. You weren't one of these. Something in you retained boundaries they couldn't quite erode. Maybe it was how you hesitated on certain questions. Maybe it was something they saw in surveillance. A conversation with a friend where you expressed doubt, a moment of fear or frustration that indicated you weren't broken enough yet. Maybe it was simply that you were too aware, too capable of seeing through the manipulation, which made you unreliable. The irony is that this awareness, this inability to fully surrender yourself to institutional control, is probably what kept you psychologically healthy. Because according to mental health research on intelligence personnel, the long-term psychological cost of working in organizations like the FSB is substantial. High rates of alcoholism, depression, and suicide among intelligence officers have been documented across multiple countries. The constant stress of deception, the isolation from normal social bonds, the moral compromise inherent in the work, these exact tolls even on those who enter the field enthusiastically. But you'll never know for certain why you were rejected. That's part of the control too, keeping you uncertain, keeping you wondering if you failed some test, or if they simply didn't need people with your profile. The ambiguity ensures you can't learn from the experience, can't try again with a better approach, can't warn others specifically about what to avoid. You're left with fragments of understanding and a whole structure of surveillance and manipulation you witnessed but can never quite explain. Months later, a friend mentions they're thinking of applying to the FSB. You want to tell them everything. You want to describe the months of psychological testing, the loyalty traps, the way they map your entire life and everyone in it. You want to explain that they're not looking for capable people to serve the country. They're looking for controllable people to serve the organization. That the process doesn't select for competence or patriotism, it selects for malleability and moral flexibility. But you don't say any of this, because your friend might report the conversation, or might be asking on behalf of the FSB, testing whether you've become a bitter critic of the organization that rejected you. Or the friend might be genuine, but you're monitored, and speaking critically about the FSB could create problems you can't predict. So you just shrug and say it's a long process, very thorough, and wish them luck. This too is control. The way even rejected candidates police their own speech, moderate their own behavior, remain compliant not through force, but through the internalized understanding that the FSB is listening, watching, keeping files, and might act on those files anytime they choose. The FSB's power in modern Russia derives not just from its legal authorities, which are substantial, including surveillance, detention, and investigation with minimal judicial oversight, but from this pervasive sense of being watched. According to research on authoritarian governance, the most effective control comes not from constant active repression, but from the population's belief that they could be repressed at any time. The FSB cultivates this belief systematically. Everyone knows someone who was questioned, knows someone who disappeared for a few hours or days of interrogation, knows someone whose career was destroyed by their attention. The recruitment process is part of this cultivation. Thousands of people apply to the FSB annually. Most are rejected. But all of them come away understanding the organization's reach, its methods, its willingness to probe every aspect of their lives. All of them internalize, at least partially, the need to be careful, to watch what they say, to consider how their actions might be interpreted by security services. The rejection letter might say you're unsuitable for service, but the message is broader. You're now someone who knows you're known, and that knowledge changes how you live. The truth is, you probably wouldn't have made it through FSB recruitment even if you'd given every right answer, passed every test, demonstrated perfect loyalty. Because the selection process is designed to maintain the organization's careful balance, capable enough to function, controlled enough to obey, psychologically flexible enough to perform morally questionable acts, but not so damaged that you become unstable. According to an investigation into Russian security services, this balance has become harder to maintain in recent years. The FSB's role has expanded dramatically since Putin, himself a former KGB officer, came to power. What was supposed to be a reformed successor to the KGB, with more limited authorities and greater oversight, has instead become arguably more powerful than its predecessor, with responsibility not just for internal security, but for border control, portions of intelligence gathering, cybersecurity, and elements of domestic political control. This expansion has required rapid growth in personnel, which some experts argue has led to declining standards. Younger officers, rushed through training, lacking the discipline and ideological commitment of Soviet-era predecessors. Greater reliance on technical surveillance and data analysis versus human intelligence, which changes the skill sets needed. And perhaps most significantly, the growing use of coerced informants rather than willing collaborators, turning to pressure and compromat because the organization can no longer rely on patriotic motivation or financial incentive alone. These challenges don't make the FSB less dangerous. If anything, an organization that feels overstretched and under-resourced often becomes more aggressive in asserting control, more willing to use heavy-handed tactics, more prone to abuse of power because the careful supervision that might check such abuse has deteriorated. This is the organization you applied to join. This is what exists behind the recruitment posters and the official website and the veneer of serving your country. A bureaucracy of control that has inherited the methods of Soviet state security, adapted them to modern technology, and deployed them not against foreign enemies primarily, but against the Russian population itself. An organization where loyalty is measured not by what you believe, but by what you're willing to do. Where competence matters less than compliance. Where your humanity, your capacity for empathy, your personal relationships, your moral boundaries are seen not as strengths to preserve, but as weaknesses to be exploited or eliminated. And the most unsettling aspect is how rational it all seems while you're inside the process. Each request feels reasonable. Just answer some questions. Just take some tests. Just prove you're trustworthy. Just demonstrate flexibility. The erosion of your autonomy happens by degrees so small you hardly notice each one, until suddenly you're contemplating informing on friends, and the hesitation you feel is not moral revulsion, but fear that you're not showing enough enthusiasm for the task. This is what you escaped when you received that rejection letter. Not a career, but a transformation. The FSB doesn't recruit people, it manufactures them, grinding away everything that makes you an individual until what remains is purely functional, an instrument of institutional will. The successful candidates, those who make it through to academy training and into operational roles, emerge changed in ways they can never fully articulate. They've passed through a psychological crucible that strips them of their separateness from the organization. Some of them are content with this transformation. Perhaps they sought it, craving certainty and structure and the feeling of being part of something larger than themselves. Perhaps they never had much sense of individual identity to begin with, and the FSB simply provided shape to their emptiness. But many, according to defectors and former officers who've spoken publicly, live with quiet desperation. They're trapped in a system they can no longer leave. Resigning from intelligence services is difficult at best, often impossible, and those who do manage to leave remain monitored indefinitely. They've sacrificed their privacy, their relationships, their moral autonomy, and sometimes realize too late that no salary and no sense of purpose justify what they've lost. You didn't know any of this when you started the application process. You thought you understood what you were signing up for. But the truth is, no one can understand from the outside. The FSB recruitment process is designed to obscure its own nature until you're too invested to back out easily, until you've revealed too much of yourself to walk away without consequences, until the question isn't whether you want this job, but whether you can afford to reject it. Your rejection, then, was a form of salvation. Whoever reviewed your file, and it went through multiple reviews, multiple levels of the organization, because the FSB is nothing if not bureaucratic, saw something that made them decide you weren't suitable. Perhaps they saw someone who would hesitate at a crucial moment. Perhaps they saw someone who might eventually defect or become unreliable. Perhaps they simply saw someone who retained too much of their own identity to be properly absorbed into the institutional machine. Whatever they saw, they were probably right. You wouldn't have made it. Not really. You might have forced yourself through academy training, might have performed adequately in your first assignments, might have convinced yourself you were serving a greater good. But eventually, inevitably, you would have encountered a moment where what you were asked to do clashed with some remaining fragment of conscience, and in that moment, you would have had to choose between your humanity and your career, between yourself and the organization. And the truly chilling reality is that by that point, you might not have chosen yourself, because the transformation would already be well underway. The months or years of conditioning, of gradually expanding moral flexibility, of increasing isolation from normal society. You'd be surrounded by colleagues who'd already made the choice to become instruments of institutional will, who'd look at your hesitation with contempt or pity. You'd have access to intelligence that would make the FSB's actions seem more justified, more necessary. You'd be entangled in a web of secrecy and complicity that would make leaving seem impossible. This is why the recruitment process is so lengthy and thorough. Not to find the best people, but to ensure the people selected can be trusted to stay selected, to remain controllable, to not crack under the pressure of what they'll be required to do. The months of testing aren't just evaluation, they're preparation, breaking you down so you can be rebuilt in the shape the organization requires. Outside now, months past your rejection, you've gradually returned to normal life. The paranoia has mostly faded. You no longer check for surveillance. Your phone feels like your own again. You've stopped thinking constantly about what the FSB knows about you. Life moves forward. But sometimes, late at night, you wonder about the people who made it through. The candidates who gave all the right answers, or at least the right enough answers. The ones who passed where you failed. Are they happy with their choice? Do they feel proud of their service? Or do they lie awake sometimes, wondering what they've become, what they've sacrificed, whether the cost of being chosen was greater than the cost of rejection? You'll never know. They can't tell you, bound by secrecy oaths that carry criminal penalties. And even if they could, they probably wouldn't have words for it. The transformation the FSB works on successful recruits happens mostly below the level of conscious awareness. You don't notice yourself becoming more suspicious, more willing to rationalize questionable actions, more isolated from people who don't understand the work. You just wake up one day and realize you've become someone your younger self wouldn't recognize, and you're not sure when exactly that happened, or if there's any way back. So when people ask if you regret not making it into the FSB, if you're disappointed by the rejection, you find you don't know how to answer. Because you dodged something, though you're not quite sure what. You escaped a fate that might have been prestigious or might have been soul-destroying, and you'll never know which it would have been for you, because you never had to find out. The FSB will continue its work with or without you. It will recruit its next class of operatives from elite universities and military academies. It will put them through the same months of testing and psychological evaluation and loyalty traps. Some will make it through, absorbing the conditioning, accepting the transformation. Others will be rejected, left wondering what they did wrong or what they did right. And the organization will grow, as it has steadily since Putin took power, expanding its authorities and its personnel and its technological capabilities. It will continue to watch Russian citizens through its surveillance networks, through its network of informants, through its legal powers of investigation and detention. It will continue to serve as the president's primary tool for internal control, ensuring compliance through the threat of its attention. This is the machine you wanted to join. This is what you would have become part of if they'd found you suitable. An organization that inherits the methods of the KGB, adapts them to the modern world, and deploys them in service of maintaining political control and state power. Where your talents would have been used not to protect Russian citizens from external threats, but to protect the current regime from internal challenges. Where your intelligence and dedication would have been channeled into surveillance and intimidation and the slow erosion of civil society. The rejection letter was polite, formal, regretful even. But looking back now, with months of distance and clarity, You understand it for what it was, not a failure on your part, but a preservation. They found you unsuitable, which meant they found something in you worth preserving, some boundary they couldn't cross, some part of you that remained your own. And while that made you useless to them, it might have saved you from becoming something you'd eventually hate. The night deepens. The cold presses against windows. Somewhere in Moscow, in Lubyanka Square, in the building that housed the KGB and now houses its successor, lights still burn in offices where files are reviewed and candidates are evaluated and decisions are made about who can be controlled and who remains a risk. The machinery of security never sleeps. And somewhere, recent recruits are settling into their new roles, beginning academy training or preliminary assignments, still idealistic perhaps, still convinced they're serving their country, not yet understanding what they've really signed up for. The transformation is beginning for them. Month by month, compromise by compromise, they're being reshaped into the instruments the FSB requires. You're grateful, ultimately, not to be among them. Grateful for whatever flaw or strength or characteristic they saw in your file that made you unsuitable. Grateful that your experience of the FSB is limited to those months of testing, that you got to see inside the machine without being consumed by it. Grateful that you remain, in some essential way, yourself. The rejection saved you. This is what you've come to understand. And while you'll never know exactly what you were saved from, because you never experienced the full reality of FSB service, you've seen enough to know it was something that would have cost you pieces of yourself you can't afford to lose. Your capacity to form real relationships. Your ability to distinguish between service and submission. Your sense that some actions are simply wrong regardless of who orders them. These sound abstract until you face their loss, until you're months into a process designed to strip them away, and you realize too late that they were load-bearing structures of your identity. The FSB doesn't just recruit operatives. It manufactures them, removing all the parts that would make them unsuitable and replacing them with institutional loyalty and moral flexibility. And once that manufacturing process is complete, once you've been fully transformed into an FSB officer, there's no going back to who you were before. This is why you wouldn't have made it through. Not because you lack intelligence or courage or commitment, but because some essential part of you resisted the transformation. Some fragment of autonomy or empathy or independent thought that couldn't be conditioned away. The FSB found this, identified it, and correctly determined you were unsuitable for service. And this unsuitability, this failure to become properly malleable, is the greatest success you'll never be able to claim. Because it means you're still here, still yourself, still capable of making your own choices rather than executing someone else's will. The price was whatever career you imagined, whatever salary and status and sense of purpose the FSB might have provided. But the alternative, becoming someone who could do the things FSB officers do, without hesitation, without internal conflict, without the weight of moral consideration, would have cost everything you are. And no job, no matter how prestigious or necessary seeming, is worth that price. Though you only understand this clearly after being rejected, after having time to process what you experienced and what you witnessed. So perhaps the real lesson isn't that you failed to get into the FSB. It's that the FSB failed to get into you, failed to find the gaps in your psychology where they could insert their hooks, failed to identify the pressure points that would make you completely controllable, failed to turn you into the kind of person they need, someone capable of anything, bound by nothing except institutional loyalty. And this failure, their failure, not yours, is what the rejection letter actually announced, though it would never phrase it that way. They found you unsuitable because you retained suitability for something else, for a life that remains your own, however modest or uncertain, for relationships that are genuine rather than tactical, for moral considerations that exist independently of operational necessity. These might seem like small things against the weight of serving Russian security, but they're the things that make you human rather than an instrument. And the FSB, for all its power and reach and sophisticated methodology, still hasn't found a way to create truly effective instruments without destroying the humanity that makes people valuable in the first place. This contradiction lies at the heart of every intelligence service, but it's particularly acute in organizations like the FSB that demand absolute control and absolute loyalty. The machinery of security continues its work, indifferent to your rejection, already processing the next batch of candidates. Some will make it through and begin their transformation. Others will be rejected, left wondering what made them unsuitable. And all of them, accepted and rejected alike, will carry forward some understanding of the organization's nature, its methods, its reach into Russian society. This understanding is part of the control. The FSB's power derives not just from its actual operations, but from its reputation, from the widespread knowledge that it's watching and testing and filing away information. Every rejected candidate becomes part of this diffuse awareness. Someone who knows firsthand how thoroughly the organization investigates, how deeply it probes, how completely it seeks control. Someone who will moderate their own behavior accordingly, police their own speech, maintain careful compliance not through direct coercion, but through internalized caution. So even in rejecting you, the FSB has exerted influence, has shaped your behavior and awareness, has ensured you remain, if not an asset, at least a properly managed element of the population they surveil. This is the genius of the system, that rejection itself serves purposes, that even those found unsuitable for service end up serving the organization's interests through their very unsuitability. But you have one thing they didn't give you and can't take away. You have the knowledge that you resisted, that somewhere in the months of testing and pressure and psychological manipulation, you remained someone they couldn't fully control. This knowledge is private, never to be spoken aloud, but it's yours. A small victory in a process designed to produce only defeat. The victory of remaining, in some essential way, unsuitable for service to a machine that demands suitable components. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's all anyone can hope for when facing an organization as vast and powerful as the FSB. Not to defeat it or escape its notice entirely, but simply to retain some core of self that it can't reach, can't reshape, can't incorporate into its machinery of control. To be found unsuitable and recognize that unsuitability as preservation rather than failure. The cold night holds Moscow in its grip. The FSB building stands dark against darker sky, lights burning in scattered windows where work continues through all hours. Inside, files are being reviewed. Candidates are being evaluated. Decisions are being made about who can be shaped into the instruments the organization requires. And somewhere in the vast filing system, physical or digital, there's a folder with your name. Marked unsuitable, filed away but not forgotten, because the FSB forgets nothing, discards no information that might someday be useful. Your rejection is documented, your unsuitability recorded, your profile maintained against the possibility that circumstances might change, or new purposes might be found for people with your particular characteristics. But for now, tonight, you're free of it. Free to sleep without wondering if tomorrow brings another test, another interview, another loyalty trap, disguised as routine procedure. Free to live your life in whatever way seems right to you, rather than in service to an organization that would have demanded everything and offered in return only the hollow satisfaction of belonging to something larger and more powerful than yourself. And that freedom, however limited by the realities of living in a society where the FSB's reach is long and its memory longer, remains yours. The rejection letter that seemed like failure was actually the greatest gift the organization could have given you. The gift of remaining unsuitable, unchanged, yourself. You can rest now, having dodged a fate you only partly understood when you applied. Having seen inside the machine without being consumed by it. Having learned enough to be grateful for rejection rather than resentful. The FSB will continue its work, recruiting and training and deploying its operatives, but you won't be among them. And that unsuitability, that failure to become what they needed you to become, stands as the quiet victory of preserving yourself against an organization dedicated to the systematic destruction of individual identity in service of institutional control. If you found this exploration of Russian intelligence recruitment valuable, I'd appreciate a like or subscribe. It genuinely helps. And I'm always curious where these stories find you. Let me know in the comments. For now, close your eyes. Let the warmth gather around you. Let your mind drift away from security services and control and the machinery of surveillance. None of it touches you now. You're here, unchanged, unsuitable for service to anything except your own life and the people you choose to care about. And in a world of constant watching and measuring and categorizing, that might be the most profound form of freedom available. Sleep well. You've earned it.